Hi, and welcome to part 2 of Alaska Archaeology. The saga continues. So what about the laws of association and superposition? So again, remember that association means that artifacts are next to one another. So if you find two artifacts in association with one another in the same stratigraphic layer, then that means they're probably about the same age. The law of superposition just basically means if you have different stratigraphic layers with artifacts in them, the ones on the bottom are going to be older than the ones on the top. So the next question is, why haven't we found the oldest sites in Alaska? And why is it so hard to do archaeology in Alaska? So basically, again, the reasons are that our seasons are very short because of the snow. We have permafrost. Alaska is huge. Most of it's not accessible. It's not accessible, so that means it's expensive to get to. Sites are like finding a needle in a haystack. Where are most of the Beringia sites now? Well, probably underwater. And don't forget the people who are moving were nomadic, hunters and gatherers. So if you do find a site, it's just going to be a small camping site, and the artifacts are going to be very perishable. And this is what Beringia looked like. So you can see all the different animals that once lived here. And this is going into the Yukon as well, into parts of Canada. Here's another picture. Here you have mammoths and mastodons. And that's actually reversed, so the one on the left is the mammoth, the one on the right is the mastodon. So, if we look at Beringia, no one's doubting that it existed, that what they think is the seas receded twice. Once between 65 and 35 years ago, and then the second time from 25 to 10,000 years ago. And for the people who believe in the Bering-Land Bridge theory, and even the people who don't, we still know that some people came down through Beringia. I'm not sure why this slide came out so bad. I am switching things over from a PC to a Mac, and sometimes we have these problems. But basically, there's the three migration theory. If you look at this theory, what they say is, and this is based on physical anthropology, meaning blood typing, dental characteristics, DNA, linguistics, all kinds of stuff, that the very first migration was actually all the Indians that became the Indians of North and South America, except the Athabascans. And it is thought that they came from somewhere in north-central Siberia between 35 and 23,000 years ago. The second group is thought to be the ancestral Athabascans, who came from a different homeland in Northeast Asia between 14 and 9,000 years ago. And then last but not least, you have the Eskimo Aleuts. It is thought that they, at one time, came from the same place, were the same people, and probably came down the coast rather than physically walking. And it is thought that this happened between 9,000 and 6,000 years ago. So what are the oldest sites in Alaska? Well, here you have the contenders. This is a map that the National Park Service put out a couple of years ago for Alaska Archaeology Week. And so here you have the oldest sites, where they're located, and about how old they are. You can also find this online. So I'm going to go through some of them. First one is Broken Mammoth. Broken Mammoth is found by Nenana, stated, depending on who you read, between 11,000 and 12,000 years ago. And a friend of mine actually found it with his family. They were driving to Fairbanks, and the road was cut open for road construction, and he stopped. And he found mammoth bones, but of course, the mammoth bones were not of archaeological significance because there was no projectile points. So he looked a little harder, and guess what? He found projectile points, so that made it a site. Here are some of the artifacts. Here's the view from the site. Now, a lot of archaeology is hard, but a lot of it is not rocket science in that when archaeologists do surveys, they have a strategy in mind. And usually that strategy is that they're going to go to the highest vantage points because that's probably where early man went because they're looking for game, they're looking for sources of water. So here is, at Broken Mammoth, a really good example of how they set up camp at a place with higher elevation looking at the river. And so here's some of the drawings of the artifacts. Obviously, they're not going to be real sophisticated because it's a really old site. Okay, the Mesa site. Now this is out in the Brooks Range. Now again, using that search strategy, if you're looking for a site out in the Brooks Range, where's your highest probability? Well, at a place where early man also had a vantage point where he could look for game. So in this case, they actually got a helicopter to take them to the top of this mesa, and guess what? Found a site that's 12,000 years old. Lime Hill is another one. Okay, Old Crow is kind of interesting because what does it take to make a site? Well, you need evidence of man. So Old Crow is in the Yukon, and they found some really old mammoth bones. Now, if you look at the bone to the left, or on the bottom, you can see how it looks like it was worked a little bit. So what archaeologists did is they looked at it and they said, oh, wait, this is a bone that was fashioned into a tool, which makes it a site. So what you have is what they think was a flesher, which was when they used bones to separate the meat from the hide. Well, other archaeologists looked at this and they said, no, that wasn't worked by man. This was just the result of 10,000 years of thawing and freezing of the ground. So they had a contest, and the ones who thought it was a tool took old bones and they tried to make tools out of them, while the other archaeologists took a bunch of caribou bones, tied them to the back of a pickup, and just drove them back and forth across the water. And they both ended up looking the same way. I think at this point they have found other stuff. They think it's a tool. But the other question that comes into play with something like this is, what if 10, or let's say 5,000 years ago, early man was coming across this mammoth kill site, he picked up a 10,000-year-old bone and made it into a tool, right? That's going to skew how old your site is. So here's some pictures from Archaeology. I'm going to be posting some online for you as well for the movies that you're going to be watching. So I wanted to talk for a few minutes about the Clovis culture. Now, Clovis is a town in New Mexico, and we find these sites all over the United States as well as in Alaska. And you can see they're all kind of made the same, but they're different sizes. So what was the deal with this? Well, the very first place they found mammoth bones in association with an artifact was at a place called Blackwater Draw near Clovis, New Mexico. So from that, and that was in the 1930s, since that time, whenever they found these Clovis points, they were always in association with mammoth kills, and so we call them Clovis points. And this is a picture of a museum that I was curator of. I went to graduate school at Eastern New Mexico University, right very close to Clovis. So here is the museum in commemoration of this first site. And there's a picture of me as a grad student, as a curator of the museum, just showing off some of the other stuff that we did, like looming, from some of the Indian groups that were from the area.